with my colleagues, Anahita Vasudevan and Shilesha Mwamba, who is our national consultant in Zambia. I would like to open the meeting now. I don't think we will have many more people joining us today. So let me first start by acknowledging and thanking our partner, the Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry, in supporting this initiative on defining a woman-owned business in Zambia to make sure that the implementation of different policies and programs is successful. I would like now to ask everyone to introduce themselves. Maybe I can start with the by calling names. So Anahita.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Anahita Vasudevan, also working with Judith, Shilesha, and I think we also have Jem here from ITC, the SheTrades initiative. So it's great to be here with you all and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Shilesha.
Good morning and welcome everybody. I'm Shilesha Mwamba, the National Coordinator for the SheTrades program. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Jem?
Hi everyone, good morning. As Anahita has mentioned, I'm Jem and I'm working with Judith and her in the SheTrades initiative.
Excellent. Kabinda?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kabinda Kawasha, Manager Financial Sector Development at Bank of Zambia, where we look at financial inclusion policies, including women's financial inclusion. Thank you.
And thank you. Gilbert?
Good morning. My name is Gilbert Mbewe. I'm Manager Contracts and Procurement Audit from the Zambia Public Procurement Authority.
Thank you. Vaida?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vaida Bundanjovo from the Patents and Companies Registration Agency. I'm Business Development Manager.
Thank you. Luanfe?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Luanfe Chiwe from Zambia Bureau of Standards. I'm Business Development Officer.
Apologies, I think I got disconnected. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would now like to ask Anahita to please start with the PowerPoint slides. So we are here today to advance the work on reaching consensus on the definition for a woman-owned business. This is part of the overall support provided by the SheTrades initiative in Zambia, which started in 2017 with several great successes in terms of connecting women to regional and international markets. We have 1 hour and a half today to discuss this important topic. Please, next slide, Anahita. Thank you. So the objective of this meeting is to update the task force members on the international workshop agreement process. We would like to discuss with you the options for a definition of a woman-owned business and get their inputs from different stakeholders so that we can finalize a draft proposal. Thank you. Okay, so what have we done so far? In May 2020, we had a kickoff meeting on this work where we discussed different definitions for the woman-owned business that could be incorporated in the public procurement law. We had a discussion on the questions that the ZPPA could include in the registration form to improve the collection of gender disaggregated data, and this is something we have completed over the course of the past few months. And the other area for collaboration will be devising a monitoring mechanism for the implementation of the public procurement law to make sure that Zambia has the baseline data, a target, and is able to actually monitor progress on the participation of women in public procurement markets. So today we would like to discuss on the basis of this important process that has been taking place in 2020, which is a process whereby ITC, SheTrades, has worked with the Swedish Institute of Standards and the ISO on the development of a global definition for a woman-owned business. And this is very important because it's providing a benchmark for stakeholders across the world to decide what suits their context and what are the best options for the type of policies or programs that different stakeholders want to implement. I will now ask my colleague Anahita to present to you the substantial output of the discussion so far and a bit more about the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. So yes, perhaps we can start with an update. We had a meeting in May 2020, so just a few months ago, where we took the outcomes of the first meeting, I think that had happened the year before, and kind of fleshed out what the areas of support could be. And we have a few updates since then. And I also invite anyone who would like to add anything after we go through them to comment. So the first on the topic of the definition of woman-owned business, as Judith mentioned, there is a process going on to create a global definition of woman-owned business through an international workshop agreement, which we'll talk about later in the presentation today. As I understand, also the CEEC Act is currently being revised, and based on the inputs from the IWA process and the discussion today, hopefully the definition of woman-owned business can be incorporated into the Act. On the collection of gender disaggregated data, we've done a review of the ZPPA registration form and provided questions to help collect better data, and they've been submitted for consideration. And on there's a new system called the One-Stop Integration System, OSIS, that's being created, and we're still in conversation about how we can integrate some of these questions and some of the techniques to collect better data into this new tool. And then on the public procurement law, as I understand, the public procurement bill has been submitted to Parliament in September of this year and includes enterprises owned by women as a target group. And there is also an exemption of bid security given for target groups, including women. So since we do have some key stakeholders that have been present and really involved in these topics as well, perhaps I can open the floor and allow some comments. I also wanted to recognize the work of Mr. Mwembe and ZPPA on the public procurement bill. Perhaps I could give the floor directly to you if you'd like to make a comment.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think the comment I would make is that, yes, the public procurement bill is now before Parliament. It was just being considered for third reading on Tuesday. So if it passes the third reading, then it means that I think before the end of this year, we are going to have a new public procurement law, which yes includes women have been singled out as one of the target groups for empowerment as one way of increasing their participation in public procurement. And yes, we have also proposed that for enterprises owned by women and other target groups, that they should be exempted from such stringent requirements like bid security, which has been identified as one of the barriers to most enterprises in participating in public procurement, because it adds to the cost of doing business. So we said that maybe we should exempt such target groups from provision of bid security as they participate in public procurement, as one way of increasing their participation. So yes, and in terms of registration, the pre-registration with the women, I think we are just waiting for, we agree on the definition of a business owned by women. Then we'll see how we can, it has not been included in the definition, in the public procurement bill, but I think it was felt that the enterprise owned by women, that requirement can actually come in either in the regulations and the solicitation documents, the tender documents we use as we do public procurement. So it will be one of the requirements for the enterprises to show that they are owned by women. So with the definition, come up with a definition. I think there will be need for certifications to be put in place, maybe by CEC. Then those enterprises, all they need to do to prove that they are owned by women is to present that certification as part of the requirements, documents that should be required in a particular procurement process. And another with the way the target groups work, what we want to enhance in our regulations when we review after the act is approved, then we'll review the regulations so that we provide more guidance on enterprises owned by women, or generally to say target groups, the target groups we have identified for empowerment. So we want to make it more clearer, because in the current regulations, it's not very clear as to what is meant by enterprises owned by women. So most procuring entities, even when we have provisions which provide that certain procurements can be reserved to certain target groups, but the way it is now, it's not very clear whether the regulations are actually enough or there's need for further guidance. So most procuring entities have not been applying those provisions. So we want to make it more clearer that enterprises owned by women are actually have been identified and provided for in the law. So procuring entities can actually reserve certain procurements or use a preference scheme where they will say for certain procurements, more preference will be given to women than another group. So that would be my opening remarks I submit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mabe. I think that was very useful. So we've noted this for our minutes of the meeting as well, and we'll share the update with everyone along with the recording after the call, because we have a few participants that weren't able to join us today. So that's great. And if there are any other comments or updates that anyone would like to add, I can leave the floor open. Okay, if not, we can move on to the discussion. So actually, I believe many of you had participated in some of the informal consultations in September earlier this year, so you may know a little bit about the IWA process. But I would like to first start with a bit of background and give you an update on what's been going on, especially the last few weeks in October, and then provide a couple of options that have come out of this discussion for consideration, and then we have a few questions for you to weigh in on, and we can continue with the discussion from there. So, as you may know, ITC and the Swedish Institute for Standards, in collaboration with the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, have been working together to develop an international workshop agreement. And of course, the topic is on women-owned and women-led businesses, the terminology related, and general guidance. And just as a bit of background on the motivation and why we're doing this, it's become clear that there is not a universally agreed upon definition or definitions of women-owned business to really describe them, what it means to be owned or led by a women-owned business. And as we've had consultations and conversations with different stakeholders across many countries, we've come to realize that there are a couple of key common issues that we've seen. The first being that in some instances, there are multiple definitions, in some cases within the same country. For example, I think based on the meeting that we had in May with this group, and also part of the consultations that we had in September, we found out that there are a few different definitions being used even in Zambia right now. You know, understanding that some institutions would use the IFC's definition that would entail a women-owned business having at least 51% of shares owned by women, or at least 20% of business shares owned by women. Then at least one of the senior management being women, and at least 30% of the board of directors being women, if a board exists. Then we also saw, and please correct us if there are any additions or edits to these definitions that we have on here. But on the Bank of Zambia, we have understood that a women-owned business is one that has at least 51% ownership of business shares and is managed by women and has one or more women in executive positions. And in some instances, stakeholders are using the ILO definition, which looks at women's women-owned businesses' decision-making and management. So the other issue that has come up is that there are multiple terminologies that are being used to describe entities. So it could be women entrepreneur or women-owned business, women-owned small and medium enterprise, women-owned small business. This creates a bit of confusion. And then the third case is that we've seen some stakeholders are not having a definition, and this can also cause an issue. So this is all to say that it's not, pertinent to only one country, but we've seen it across multiple scenarios. So it's something that really justifies having an overall global definition. So based on that, we had in August to September this year, we had a series of informal consultations, 16 to be exact. We had more than 340 stakeholders across 49 countries participate and provide their initial inputs. Then the official IWA workshop process started in October. It took place from the 14th to the 16th, and we had 183 stakeholders from 57 countries participate. And based on that, we have a first draft of the IWA for discussion, and we're circulating in November now this draft for comments from all the stakeholders, and then we will have a second workshop to validate the draft and finalize it. So with that being said, we'd like to share with you a few proposed definitions with the inputs from the first IWA workshop. And I think we can focus probably on the first two that are on the screen today. So perhaps if anyone has any issues with seeing the screen, I can read it out to you, and then we have a few additional guidelines that we can discuss. So on the definition of a woman-owned business, we said that it was a business that has at least 51% ownership by one or more women, whose management and day-to-day operations are controlled by one or more women, and that is operated independently from other non-woman-owned businesses, and where a woman is also signatory of the company's legal accounts. And in comparison, we also had the definition of a woman-led business. So that's a business where there's a woman CEO who's actively involved in the business, and that is at least 30% owned by one or more women, and whose management and day-to-day operations are controlled by one or more women decision makers, and has at least 30% of the board of directors comprised of women where a board exists, and that is operated independently from other non-women-led or women-owned businesses, and where a woman is also signatory of the company's legal accounts. And here also just to note that there's a discussion also on women-led cooperatives, in which at least 51% of the total number of votes are held by women, and where there's a majority of the board of directors that are women, and the majority of leadership positions are also held by women. So that's just to update you on a few of the definitions that came out of this workshop. We also discussed some key guidelines on management and control. For example, saying that irrespective of the ownership threshold, that stakeholders expect women to be genuinely managing and controlling the businesses, really to avoid this idea of fronting. And on independence, to ensure that it is a business that's operated by women without relying on resources from non-women-owned businesses, to avoid the idea of a pass-through company. And we also just wanted to note a few other points on dilution by investment, saying that there is a potential issue that as businesses start to scale up and there is investment, it might dilute the percentage of ownership by women. So there's a proposal to consider ownership by founding women as a term. And then as I mentioned briefly before, that there was a proposal also to consider standalone definitions for women-led cooperatives and also informal women-led enterprises. So before we go on, I'd like to open the floor to see if there are any questions from anyone, and then we can continue.
Good morning, Kabinda here. I just wanted clarity. So the definitions that have been provided, we're not intending to like select one, but those would be optional definitions because they all seem relevant. So I just wanted just clarity.
Yes, thank you very much. So if I could respond, and maybe Judith, if you wanted to provide comments as well here. So since there is this global definition being created through this IWA process, we wanted to propose these as options for Zambia to consider. So for the purposes of today's discussion, we really wanted to look at women-owned and women-led business definitions that we provided on the last screen, and I can go to that for you, and to see which would be more suitable for implementation, for example, in the CEC Act or some of the relevant documents and as part of the ZPPA implementation of the law, etc. That Mr. Mumbe was discussing before, that even if it's not directly in the text, that it could be included as for women to participate. Mm-hmm.
Can I add just one additional comment?
Yes, please.
Maybe we could even start looking at the women-led cooperatives. I'm doing some work related to informal finance and savings groups. And because these have become quite prominent, and we've had discussions with other regulatory institutions where we want to be giving guidance to some of these informal community-based institutions that as they grow to a certain level, they'll probably need to consider formalizing, and the cooperative sector is likely to be one of the key areas. And because of the type of investments, the complexity of the transactions, and even just the growth of these savings groups. So it's a definition that I think would be important or even relevant for Zambia. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Koisha. This is well noted. Judith, did you have anything you wanted to add? I saw you were unmuted.
Thank you, Anahita. No, just to add some thoughts on this, we consulted more than 300 stakeholders between September and August and September, and I think, like, I'm sure there were also stakeholders from Zambia for sure. I remember Gilbert and Shileshe, thank you. So two things I think became very obvious. The first one is that we'll never agree on one category of businesses because different stakeholders target different women. So for example, a number of financial institutions working with startup companies now also want to include a women-governed business where there's no requirement on ownership. So as a result of all this discussion, it became quite obvious that we will have to create at least 3-4 options for different groups of women, and then everyone will choose which one of these suits you better, basically. But at least we will create some level of harmonization and standardization between the specific categories. Because, for example, right now, women-led businesses means different things across the world. Some stakeholders say 10% ownership, some others say 20% ownership, some others say women-led businesses, but actually there's no ownership requirement at all. So even by creating an IWA on women-led businesses, we are indeed creating some standardization. So that's one thing. Basically, we'll come up with a number of definitions, and then each stakeholder will say, this one works for me, I would use this one. And the second thing is, one issue that came up over and over again is the concern with fronting. And that's quite relevant in the case of Zambia, because so the problem with fronting doesn't happen all the time. So for example, if you talk to research institutions or the work that the ILO is doing with informal companies, they don't really have this problem. So you don't really have a lot of like men-led companies or men-owned companies trying to pass as women-led companies. But for you, this would be obviously very relevant, because all the stakeholders working on public procurement, for example, they did experience a lot of these problems. So it's very important that you look not only at the women-owned vis-a-vis women-led, but also on the other requirements, independence, control, etc. Because this is really what is aimed at making sure that you can distinguish what is a fronting company from a genuinely women-owned or led businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. So if anyone else would like to make a comment or has an initial reaction to any of these definitions, I can open the floor. Okay.
Sorry, this is Chileshe.
Yes, please.
Anahita, I just wanted clarification because I signed out at some point due to poor network. But are we able to apply multiple definitions in one country? Because as Karinda said, all of these are relevant, but applied differently. And especially in Zambia, there is a huge push for cooperatives right now. So we are able to apply multiple definitions within the country, correct?
Yes, since there are different thresholds or different, slightly different criteria for each one. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, thank you
for the clarification.
And I see we have another hand here. I can unmute you, Ms. Vida.
I have a question. May you please go to the next slide? Thank you. So on the additional guidelines, the one for independence, the last line that says there has to be a test criteria to avoid pass-through companies where you have to do a test to just find out that these women are not relying on non-women owned businesses for resources. How are you going to do that? Is that something that's feasible?
Yes, thank you very much. Perhaps, so this is part of the discussion that came out saying that this should be, I think, in consideration for independence, but maybe I can actually give the floor to Judith on this one if she'd like to answer. Be better suited.
Could you repeat the question? Yeah, what was the question? Because I didn't understand.
If I understood correctly, or maybe Ms. Vida would like to speak, otherwise I can try.
Ms. Vida, sorry, I couldn't understand it. Do you remember? Do you mind repeating it? Hello, Ms. Vida?
It seems that she's currently muted, but she was talking about in terms of the independence and what criteria has been established or how the criteria will be established to test and avoid pass-through companies.
Okay.
Also, if it's actually feasible, something that can be physically monitored.
Yes, okay, perfect. Great question. I'd like to, Anahita, do you mind if I share my screen?
I think you should be able to share now.
Thank you. Share screen. I hope you can see. Can you see the document? Perfect. So this is the draft EWA that has been circulated. So it's our official document. It's still a draft, but I just wanted to share with you the criteria on the guidelines on independence here. So what a company needs to demonstrate to prove that the company is independent, so it's not a pass-through company. These are the draft criteria. So the woman expertise and skills shall be indispensable to the running of the enterprise. The woman shall be able to operate the enterprise without substantial reliance on outside resources. And the woman shall be in control of all major business decisions affecting the enterprise. Here are additional criteria. Let me focus on, let's skip now the first bullet point for now. So first of all, there are guidelines with regard to the contract with the outsiders, with outside companies, to make sure they're in line with the industry practices. There will be a scrutiny of interlocking ownership, which will not be allowed. What will not be allowed is also common directors, officers, or members between the two enterprises. The enterprise use of employees, equipment, or expertise from outside companies. The receipt of financial benefits should be commensurate to the duties performed. And the enterprise should possess all the applicable legal requirements to legally conduct business. Now, all of these criteria are really derived from, they're the result of the experience of stakeholders who had to deal with pass-through companies and fronting. And these are basically the key, how to put it. So this is how stakeholders in Chile, the US, etc., have seen that male-owned companies usually try to skirt the rules or to front, basically. And this is why we have this set of criteria. The first criteria on long-term contracts or lease agreements, it's still to be discussed. There is no agreement yet because there is some concern that you may have generally women-owned and led companies that have a long-term contract for, with a large companies or with a technology provider, etc. And we don't want to disqualify these businesses. So these are very detailed, as you can see, these are very detailed criteria on this. The other thing I'd like to highlight is at the beginning, the first draft document required that the woman that manages the company also has technical expertise, but that requirement was removed because it was felt that it was discriminatory towards the woman. Because very often you can have an excellent manager or CEO who is not a technical expert in the field, but she still has control of the company and she's the genuine leader, manager of the company. With regard to how this is controlled, so this EWA document will not go into that, but the information we collected from colleagues from the US, Chile, etc., is that usually there are two things. One is a scrutiny of all the legal documents pertaining the company and the relationship between the company and an outsider company. And the second thing is a physical inspection. So usually there is a physical inspection within the company to check, basically, well, they say that some of the things, so there are usually questionnaires, but some of the things usually it's the trained inspector will be able to pick up. And that's especially with regard to the management and control. So they will look at, for example, whether the office of the woman is actually a functional office, so it looks like the woman is actually working there. They may interview other colleagues, staff members, and so forth. The stakeholders from the US told us that for very high value transactions and high value complex companies, usually they have a very specialized inspector that only deals with these. So these are companies that are maybe listed, publicly listed, they have very complex ownership structures, etc. So they usually have one person that deals with a very complex one. But independence, management, and control should be looked at jointly. So all the three criteria actually help you to identify fronting or pass-through companies. Thank you. I hope this is, I'm happy to take more questions. I hope this answered your question, Baida.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
I think maybe just to add, sorry, part of the discussion here today could be that actually there is indeed a need for capacity building for whoever will be in charge of the verification process. And if I may, maybe one of the recommendations could be also to organize some sharing of good practices with stakeholders that have done a lot of verification in this field. I feel through the EWA we have a good network of stakeholders we could mobilize for Zambia.
Thank you very much, Judith. Perhaps if there are no other comments at this stage, I can share my screen. Just one second. Oh, yes, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So perhaps we can move on to some of the discussion questions which we prepared for today. And just to clarify that the purpose of this will be to take your input so that we can send in a written kind of proposal, the definition for your consideration and to be circulated among the whole task force. So I can just go through the questions quickly and then go back to the screen with the definitions so that you can read and think about it with that in front of you. So the first question is which of the options that we shared before would be more suitable, for example, for the CEC Act, and why do you think so? And should we emphasize ownership or management? And then the third question is whether we want to promote a higher percentage of ownership in the definition or promote a larger group of eligible businesses. And then the last question is which institutions will be in charge of the verification. So perhaps I can just go back to the screen so that you can see. So we can tackle the first discussion. So it sounds like we have some opinions on the three that are on the screen already. I can open the floor to anyone who would like to speak. Yes, Ms. Vaida.
Okay, so in terms of the definitions, I would go with the women-owned businesses. Because when I look at the companies register right now, I know I've seen an increase in the number of women-owned businesses. And in my view, this is information that's readily available, and already our systems are linked with certain institutions, for example, the Zambia Public Procurement Authority. So this is something that will be easy to verify, unlike the women-led businesses, because I don't know which institution has this information that tells us the number of women businesses that have a woman CEO. So I'll go with the women-owned business as a definition for the CEC Act. I submit.
Thank you very much. This is Well noted. Would anyone else like to weigh in? Perhaps Mr. Mwebe?
I think I would go for the multiple, to have multiple definitions rather than one, because of there are some businesses, yes, which they're not owned by women, but they're led by women. So, which means that some women are being empowered by leading such businesses. So there's need also to recognize such businesses. So maybe the multiple definition as proposed here, I would go for that, so that we are not restrictive to just a particular, just with ownership, but also with how these businesses are governed. So I think I'm for the proposal for multiple definitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps since we also have a smaller group today, we can hear from everybody. Ms. Kawisha, would you like to speak?
Thank you. I think I'd go for multiple, but maybe put them in hierarchical or a sequence, so that where one can't be, no, I wouldn't say where one can't be verified, but I think maybe just in order of priority and ease of verification, like the first submission where we would go for women-owned businesses, because that is easily verifiable, even for our sector financial institutions. And then a secondary verification or attribute would be the women-led businesses. So going for multiple, but sort of like put in sequence.
Yes, thank you. This is noted.
May I just ask something? So I think one could have different definitions if different benefits are attached to the different definitions. So it will not be very helpful to have both women-led and women-owned businesses unless what you are saying is that the women-owned businesses may get X benefits and women-led businesses may get different benefits, lower benefits. Because otherwise you will have a situation where basically every company can qualify as a women-led business because the ownership requirement is 30%. And then a subgroup of them would also be a women-owned business because they may be 51% or more. But unless you give them an incentive on why they should go to 51%, there is no reason for them to be like, they would just be women-led businesses. I don't know if it makes sense. So women-led businesses is the bigger group, and then a subgroup of them would be women-owned business. So unless there's a clear reason why you would want to have the two definitions, it will not be really helpful, if I may say so. Yes, Gilbert. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Mwebe, I'm trying to unmute you. Yes?
Okay, yes. I think like currently what we have in the current law, not the one which, not the bill, for citizen companies, where we give preference, we have three definitions. There's a citizen-owned business, there's citizen-empowered, and then we have a citizen-influenced. And then because of the three categories, more preference is given to the citizen-owned enterprise. So even with this, if we are to adopt these three definitions, then we'll give more preference to the woman-owned business. And where we have no woman-owned business, then we can go to the next category, and the other, just as proposed by my other colleague, that we can do some sort of ranking. But in terms of public procurement, what we can do is we can put like some sort of a preference scheme. This could be put in a preference scheme where more preference will be given to a women-owned business. Because even as what we have proposed in the law is that for public procurement generally, not to do with women-owned businesses, we give more preference to citizens than in other. So a company owned by a citizen will be given more preference. So similarly, for this, we can say if we have these different categories participating in a particular procurement, more preference will be given to a business which is owned by a woman, which is 51% ownership. Where we don't have that one as a company qualifying to be awarded the contract, then we can look at the woman-led business or women-led cooperatives. So it can work into some sort of a preference scheme which already have provided for in the law. So having one definition, I think will not be good enough, because it means those companies which are led by women will not be considered for empowerment. So a multiple definition, I think I'm for a multiple definition. But the other comment I just came in is as we develop this definition, in terms of public procurement, like I said earlier, we are giving more preference to citizens. So I don't know how we can bring that aspect in this definition, because if it's a woman-owned business, is the woman a citizen of Zambia, or it could be a foreigner, but they are women, and the ownership is 51%. If it would be like that, then those will not be considered, because what we have proposed in the law is that more preference should be given to citizens, even if that woman is based here in Zambia, operating here in Zambia. As long as they're not citizens, they won't enjoy the preference which has been proposed in the public procurement. So I don't know how we can bring in the issue of citizen in the definition, or as it is, it's enough to assume that these women are actually citizens we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. If I can react, Anahita?
Yes, please.
So I think on the differential benefits, this is very, very clear. Thank you. So I can see how you will have the first tier, women-owned businesses, with the largest preferential benefits. Women-led businesses. My question is whether you need a third category and what this category will look like. Would it look only at management with no ownership, or would you be looking at employment? So a question on whether you need a third category and what would you want to emphasize there. And the second is just a reaction to this issue of citizenship. Point taken. I think it can be easily incorporated. We can share with you some text taken from other regulations. One thing to consider is whether you will want only citizens or also permanent residents. For example, the US legislation, it's reserved for women who are either citizens or permanent residents. That's one thing. And point well taken, because for example, I can share with you that Chile has a similar legislation for women entrepreneurs, and in their trade agreements with the EU, DigiTrade has actually raised this issue of whether European women will qualify for Chile's preferential procurement policies. And in that case, because there is a trade agreement, Chile has confirmed that European women will qualify. Now, if you do not want something like this, I think you have a very valid point. It should be included in the regulations from the start. So very good point. We can share some text with you but one major thing for Zambia to decide is whether you will want to include permanent residents or not. Thank you.
Would anyone like to respond to this question? Yes, Mr. Gilbert?
Okay, in terms of permanent residents, yeah, those, like in our law, those are considered as the, because of two categories. We have citizen bidders, then we have also local bidders. So a local bidder is a bidder who is based here in Zambia, but is not necessarily a citizen of Zambia. So already I think we have something where we consider, so there we have three definitions of bidders. We have a citizen bidder, a local bidder, and a foreign bidder. So a foreign bidder is the company which is not registered to conduct business in Zambia. A local bidder is the company which is registered to do business in Zambia, but the ownership is it's owned by a non-citizen, but they are based in Zambia. They could be permanent residents or something like that. So I think we have something which covers that already. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I see Ms. Kawesha is unmuted if you'd like to take the floor.
Okay, thank you. I think based on what has been said, I think the women-owned business is good. In terms of verification, I think that would be the easiest point on verification. Just speaking from the financial sector, where we do these farmers checks with the financial institutions, the women-led business is a little bit difficult to verify, but these are things that can then be emphasized or sensitization created. So I think going by women-owned businesses and then trickling down to the others would be good. And or maybe it can come later. I think I just noted a question on how will this information be disseminated to women, because these are good definitions, but there has to be some starting point where we can create awareness of these definitions for women so that they structure and form their businesses appropriately. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. That's been noted as well in terms of sharing information on this. And I just wanted to go back to Judith's question before, which was, in addition to these two that we're discussing now, is there a need for a third category? And what would it look like in terms of ownership and management? Would anyone like to respond?
Maybe if I can comment.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you'd want to follow something similar. So for example, women-owned businesses, I think these fall under like the company registry definition. And then where we have the Cooperatives Act, where various cooperatives can be formed, then this is where you'd have the women-led cooperatives. So it's best to look at the regulations which are there. So under the Cooperatives Act, you could then say women-led cooperatives, you have this definition, which suits that act. And then there's also, if I'm not mistaken, is it the Societies Act? We had some meetings. So look at the regulations, like how they define them, and then put the women context. So maybe this one wouldn't be women-led cooperatives. Is it women-led? Okay, yes, women-led cooperatives. And then if it's the other act, it would be women-led. Is it the Societies Act? I think they have different definitions there. So then it would be the women-led societies or associations. What you're doing is basically taking the existing definitions and then just adding the women-led or women owned components. So just drawing from the first two and then applying them in the context of the other regulations on how we define these institutions in Zambia.
Okay, thank you very much. Judith, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So then perhaps we can even move on to the next topic that we have here. And that was, and maybe we even discussed a bit of this, but do we want to promote a higher percentage of ownership or a larger group of eligible businesses?
I think in a way stakeholders have already responded to this.
Yes, I agree. So maybe we can move on. And that's the last topic on which institutions will be in charge of verification.
Can I comment on this?
Yes, please.
Yes. So here we want to verify these definitions from various standpoints. So I think if the what should I say? Because these businesses and various forms of companies submit returns to the various institutions where they are licensed, maybe you could involve those licensing institutions, because if there's any change in any other year and they submit the returns, then that information would be provided. So you could include them in the verification, especially on the ownership part. On the women-led part, depending on the extent to which these businesses are maybe like audited, maybe you may want to consider accounting firms, because they have this information if these are some of their clients. So one way of empowering the women is saying that maybe if you have an accounting or audit firm, you may want to just get a form of verification from them that yes, the management and ownership of the company has women involved. So maybe going through the Zambia Institute of Chartered Accountants. And they do have a women's arm, and I think their recent president who was elected is also a female. So this is also another way of bringing this gender component into the institute, that these are things that they can maybe verify. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. This is noted on accounting or audit firms. I see Ms. Chibwe has her hand raised. Would you like to speak?
Yes, please. I think also on the part of the Zambia Bureau of Standards, especially with a standard or the ISO standard or a ZS standard being established, we can also come up with a certification scheme that allows for a verification exercise where you're able to certify and state that a particular cooperative or organization or company is women-owned. And then with the way the scheme rules can be set up, where there's also a 6-monthly verification exercise just to ensure that it's not a front and the business is as defined. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, I've noted this down as well. And just to clarify, who would be in charge of that scheme?
The certification scheme would be run by the Zambia Bureau of Standards. So
Okay,
it'd be run by the certification unit under ZAPS.
Okay, thank you. Great. Would anyone else like to comment? Ms. Vaida, perhaps?
I totally agree with the last two speakers. We have different institutions that are in charge of different regulations. So I think the most important thing is for us to be able to identify which institution will be relevant in terms of verification, and then maybe we can submit that to you. Because obviously, with PACRA, we are a repository of information pertaining to registration. So that's information that we can easily provide to anybody that's interested. But I think other than that, you've got ZABS, you've got Zika, even CAC and other institutions. So maybe we can give that information to you at a later stage so that we don't omit any institution that might be relevant in terms of verification.
Thank you very much, Ms. Faida. If I could suggest, maybe that information could be sent to Chileshe and then we can include it in the proposal that we send.
Yes, sure, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Koisha, I see you're unmuted.
Yes, I wanted to ask, since you're going to have various verification institutions, would it then be useful to have like a standard template in which they can give their opinion or give their verification? So maybe a standard verification form. So whether it's coming from PACRA or ZABS or Zika, the format is the same. So whether it would be an opinion or, yeah, is there a verification template or statement so that it's standardized across the institutions? Thank you.
Can I ask Judith, maybe, based on the IWA process and experience of other countries, for example, where there are multiple institutions that are doing this verification, how do they align or harmonize the process?
So usually, okay, there are two different models. With regard to women, what we have seen in the countries that have been doing this for longer, it's usually quite centralized, actually. It's not necessarily with the standards body. For example, in the US, it's done by WeBank, which is a specific certification program. So it sits outside the standardization body. But in Chile and the US and with WeConnect, it tends to be centralized. One could also look at the South African model for BEE that you're all familiar with, where you actually have private service providers that help the enterprises with certification. And then, I mean, obviously there is a quality check on who can do that by the Department of Trade and Industry in that case. So I think it's two different models. Maybe Zambia could consider, combining this with the Zambia Bureau of Standards and the different private service provider, but obviously then there's an issue of someone needs to check to make sure that this certification issued by the private service providers are actually valid. The other thing is with the EWA process, we will not get to the point of developing like a specific detailed guidelines. We had this discussion, but I don't think we will get to that in 2020. This is potentially something that we can see how we can support you later on. But it will not be one of the deliverables of the EWA, because our partner, the Swedish Institute of Standards, is very clear that we can provide criteria, but through the EWA, you don't get into specific operational issues with regard to verification. It's beyond the scope of the EWA. However, that is not to say that, I mean, we can't support you separately. Thank you. I hope this is helpful.
Thank you, Judith. So maybe if I could just add, it sounds like since there were proposals for different institutions that could be in charge of this, whether it's ZAB or private service providers, we can talk about a template, as was mentioned by Ms. Koisha. So we have noted this in the minutes. So perhaps in the future, this is something that we can support on based on Judith's reaction. So that's great. I think we're actually nearing the end of the discussion questions that we had. So I'd like to now open the floor to any last comments to make sure that we capture any concerns you may have in our proposal. Okay, if not, perhaps we can wrap up the conversation. Oh, actually, I see one from Chilishe. Yes?
Okay. Yes, Anaita, one thing that I did want to ask is, in terms of the guidelines that you have provided on the second page in relation to independence and so on, are those also going to be placed in the proposal? Especially the expanded form of it, not just this, the brief text.
Yes, they will be. They're included in the EWA. We can share with you the draft EWA. It's quite a long document. I think it's 10 pages, and it's currently right now we are receiving comments. So if you have any comments, there is a specific form to send the comments in. We invite all of you to please send us comments. What works for you? What doesn't work? Where would you want to see changes or clarifications? Jem, she's still here. Jem can send with you the official letter so that you see the link where you can download the documents. It will be also an attachment. It's a form. It's an ISO form where you can provide specific comments. Thank you. We'll share everything with you today.
Okay, and the second aspect of it is that my understanding with next steps, which I have to get clarification from you and also just feedback from the rest of the participants, is once the report of this meeting is sent, as well as the proposals, we will circulate for comments, as Judith has explained, to all the participants. That then locally, what that will happen is that we would then prepare the final submission to the Ministry of Commerce. So all that we put in our proposals to the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry, and they will then feedback to us what they will take on and what they can support, as also highlight areas of support that would be needed. For example, either capacity building, as Judith mentioned, and also maybe the verification templates and support that's needed, or support in guidelines and in mainstreaming. So I just wanted to ask if to the participants and Naita, if this is correct.
Yes, thank you, Chilishe. Yes, as I understood, we would send the minutes and the draft proposal to everyone for their comments, and then we can submit to MCTI as you mentioned. So this sounds good to us, but we'd like to hear from other participants if they have any additions to this. Okay. If not, I think that sounds good in terms of next steps. So before we close, I also wanted to run a quick poll with you all. Let me just open it quickly. This will help us understand if we've captured all of your feedback today properly, and also help us remain accountable to the donors and everything for our projects. So it's really important for us to be able to show this. So we'd really appreciate if you could just take a minute to answer these 2 questions. They should pop up on your screen now. Could someone please confirm if you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I'll leave it open just for another minute so that everyone can respond.
Anaita, I kindly ask that you include these two questions to the form, if possible, that you sent to us, so that other stakeholders that receive the recording can also participate.
Yes. Thank you, Chileshi. Okay, so I think we have all of the responses from the group here, so I'll end the poll. Thank you very much. And with that, I think I'd like to close today's discussion. As we mentioned just now, we'll be sending the recording, some of the additional documents from the EWA process, our notes from this meeting, and the draft for your consideration. So we really thank you for taking the time to speak today and sharing with us your feedback. And maybe I can hand the floor over to Judith just to close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Anahita. We would like to thank all of you for taking the time to discuss this very important topic for us and for yourself. We look forward to continue engaging with you. We will share all the relevant information. We also look forward to see as many of you as possible at the EWA workshop taking place in December with all the global stakeholders, and to share your views with them, and to see also what others are doing in this regard. That's it. Have a wonderful day, and thank you very much for the good and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.